The last days for this world. When did they begin? Well, disciples asked Jesus what would be the sign of his coming. Notice they didn't ask for signs, they would ask for a sign of his coming. And when we read through Matthew 24, we see that Jesus didn't use the word sign in reference to wars, food shortages, earthquakes, and all those things. Those were the things they would have to endure to the end to be saved. But in verse 30 is when he applied the word sign. It says, "Then the sign of the Son of Man will appear in heaven, and then all the tribes of the earth will mourn, and they will see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven with power and great glory." And that sign would be something that would be visible to all the nations and cause them to mourn and have a lot of grief in regards to that. So it would have that particular effect on all the people here upon this earth. So this will signal Jesus' coming, and that coming will mean destruction. And that's why they're experiencing this grief. So this particular sign, not signs, like the Watchtower and many others want to say is some composite sign of wars, food shortages, and earthquakes. It's not what Jesus said the sign is. It's a sign that we've yet to see. So in between the first century, because he told them that you will hear wars and reports of wars, so they would experience the conditions that they would have to endure to the end, as Jesus was forewarning them, the persecutions and all those type of things. And the end would be in the future when Jesus would return, and of course that sign would be there to indicate that he has returned. So we've not yet seen that sign yet. So as Peter applied it in Acts 2:17, where he brought out that what was happening there, the pouring down of the Spirit, was evidence of the last days. Paul brought that out in Hebrews 1:2. They were experiencing those things. And James 5 was bringing too that things were happening in the last days. Notice 2 Timothy chapter 3, Paul was inspired to write, "But know this, that in the last days perilous times will come, for men will be lovers of themselves, lovers of money, boasters," and so forth. He goes on about those times. But to show that they were experiencing those times in that particular day, notice what he says in verse 5 of 2 Timothy chapter 3. "Having a form of godliness, but denying its power, and from such people turn away." So he was telling them at that time to turn away from such people because they were experiencing those things at that time. So we have the last days that began in the first century. When Jesus went back to heaven, was glorified, the last days began. Before that, the nations were allowed to go on and be able to do as they wanted. But now they were being called to repent because now they were in the last days. No longer could they just go about, and God was going to allow them to just go about those things. Now it was time to repent because the world had entered their last days. Also figured into these last days that many have not, and therefore have not understood the whole scope of the last days, is the parable of the wheat and the weeds that Jesus mentioned in Matthew 13. That Jesus planted those wheat in the first century, and along with them, eventually weeds would grow, a type of weed called Zizanium or darnel. And these type of weeds, when they grow, they look similar to wheat, but they're different, of course, and their seeds are toxic. They can be deadly. So instead of just uprooting them as they were growing up, Jesus said allow them to continue to grow together with the wheat, and then the harvest would come, which would be Armageddon, because they're binding up the darnel and throwing it into the everlasting fire. So in between the start of the last days and then when we get to the Armageddon, these weeds are growing. So they're growing today, and they're in full growth today. The weeds have grown all over the place. And so if we're going to identify those who are really serving God properly, we have to look at the fruits. One is producing wheat, nutritious, good spiritual things, good fruit. Others are producing poisonous, toxic seedlings that, if ingested, of course, will have a bad effect. Jesus said when he returns, will he find the faith? At the end time, the angels, they will know exactly who are the wheat, who are the zizanium or darnel or weeds, and they will first uproot those weeds and then bundle them up and throw them into the fire. So throughout all this period of time, in the last days, we've seen many famines, many wars, many food shortages, many pestilences, much violence, all types of wickedness has happened in these last days. We've seen the zizanium, the darnel, the fake Christians, as they've shown their abusive way they've acted. Like Jesus talked about Matthew 24, the slave that turns evil and that treats others in an abusive way. We have seen those who claim to be sheep but are actually wolves. They've been abusive to others. They've been abusive to the sheep and other people. They've acted just like wolves. And so during these last days, we've seen them show themselves in the Catholic Church, in the Baptist Church, and many other churches, the Calvinist churches, how they have returned evil to evil to others, have killed and brutalized people, enslaved them. Catholic Doctrine of Discovery. Baptists lie about the curse upon Canaan. They said it's on Ham. Thus, all people descended from Ham should be enslaved and whatever. The slave trade brought forth itself by means of false religious entity, such as the Catholic Church. And this has all happened during the last days. We're still in those last days. They've been going on for close to 2,000 years. You know, it's something interesting to think about, that before the flood, from Adam's creation to the flood, it was over 1,600 years before the flood came. We're far past that now, as far as years are concerned, which denotes God's patience and how he doesn't want people to die, because he knows when this destruction happens, you know, the people that's going to be destroyed, they're going to be thrown in the second death or lake of fire. So he wants to give them every opportunity, which he has. But in spite of the opportunity, the weeds continue to be numerous. The many fake and fraudulent Christians are evident. They are toxic. They are death-dealing in what they're saying. Anyone submitting themselves and being a part of these religious organizations that are abusive, that promoted slavery and white supremacy, that do not have honor for everyone, as 1 Peter 2:17. When we're in those situations, if we stay under that, then we're going to suffer the ill effects of such things. But we find that many people, black people, they're right there in those type of organizations that demand that whites be their leaders. And this was the whole premise behind white supremacy, and what the Catholic Church was talking about, is that whites are the ones who should lead. And so black people who suffered under this many times go back for a second helping, in that they go back under this type of authority and give such ones unquestioned authority. And as Paul said, that doesn't make any sense. 2 Corinthians 11 verse 20, for you put up with it if one brings you into bondage, if one devours you, if one takes from you, if one exalts himself, if one strikes you on the face. And so Paul was showing this doesn't make any sense. Why are you exalting such ones? Why are you right there with them? And many times over, Black people who suffered under this bondage, they go right back and say, well, give me some more, and give these such ones with their white leadership unquestioned authority. Paul showed that doesn't make any sense. Even if you're in these churches, you should be checking everything, making sure. You should never give them unquestioned authority. And usually you'll find when they insist on white leadership, their teachings are toxic. Their teachings are things that should not be said. And the only route you have is to get out of there. It makes me wonder today why many people are Catholic or Baptist, particularly if you're a person of color. Knowing their history, why would you even be there? I mean, that doesn't make any sense, as Paul brought out here. I mean, we've been in the last days since the first century, and this Zizanium, darnel, had grown all over the place. It's very overgrown. And it's very important now to understand who are the wheat and who are the Zizanium. When the angels come, they're not going to be under any delusion. They're going to know who they are, and they're going to uproot them and throw them into the fire. If you don't have a love of truth, you're going to be caught up with this darnel. That's what's going to happen. These weeds. You can't just serve God the way you want to. You can't say anything you want to. You can't believe, well, I have my own belief, you have your own belief. It doesn't work like that. God's not asking you anything. He's telling you what he wants. So you show your love, as 1 John 5:3 says, love God by keeping his commandments, or you do what you want to do. We got to be able to know what it takes to produce the wheat, to be that type of person, or are we producing the toxic, false spiritual things? When that sign appears in the sky, harvest time.